It was an ordinary Tuesday when the letter arrived, but for the Thompson family, it felt like the world had just tilted off its axis. The thick, cream-colored envelope was official, the gold-embossed seal unmistakably belonging to the local Homeowners Association, HOA. As soon as the mail was opened, the air in the Thompson household seemed to freeze. "This is insane," Amanda Thompson muttered, staring at the letter in disbelief. She handed it to her husband, Mark, who sat at the kitchen table, nursing his first cup of coffee. He barely glanced at it, certain it was some kind of mistake, until his eyes locked on the words in bold. "Effective immediately, you are prohibited from parking any vehicle in your own driveway due to a violation of HOA guidelines." Mark's stomach twisted. It was as though someone had ripped a rug from beneath his feet. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath. They had been part of this community for over 15 years. Never once had they faced a warning, a fine, or a complaint. Their driveway, like every other driveway in the neighborhood, was as much a part of their property as the roof above their heads. The letter didn't provide much explanation. It simply referred to a vague violation that was unforgivable under the HOA's rules, offering no specifics. Mark flicked it over, hoping for some kind of clarification, but the back was blank. He turned to Amanda, his face pale. "This is a mistake, right?" But Amanda had already picked up the phone. The tension was palpable as she dialed the number printed at the bottom of the letter, her finger shaking slightly. Mark stood, pacing, his mind racing. How could this be happening? The HOA had always been overbearing, sure, but this felt different. This felt like an attack. As Amanda waited for the call to connect, Mark's gaze drifted to the window overlooking their driveway. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the street, and the familiar sound of distant lawnmowers and neighborly chatter filled the air. But as he watched the cars parked in their driveway, his truck, Amanda's sedan, he felt a sudden tightness in his chest. What did this mean? How could they be banned from their own driveway? What was the HOA's real game here? "Hello." Amanda's voice snapped Mark back to reality. Her eyes, normally calm and composed, were wide with shock as she listened. "Wait, what do you mean we're not allowed to park here anymore?" She paused, her face darkening. "You're serious?" Mark took a few steps toward her, his heart racing now. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, too calm. "I'm afraid that's correct, Mom," the HOA representative said. "You're in violation of neighborhood guidelines, and the board has made its decision. If you wish to contest it, you will need to attend the next HOA meeting." "What violation?" Amanda demanded, now standing, her hand tightening around the phone. The voice on the other end hesitated for a moment. "We can't disclose that information at this time," it said. "You'll need to come to the meeting for clarification." The call ended with a soft click, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Mark's head swam with questions. Why would the HOA single them out? The Thompson family had always been model citizens, polite, respectful, and absolutely in compliance with every rule. Why now? And why was it happening so suddenly? Dad, their teenage son, Jake, called from the hallway, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "What's going on?" Mark's mind snapped into focus. He didn't have answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to end with some simple apology. The neighborhood they had called home for years was about to become a battlefield, and the rules of engagement were about to change. He looked at Amanda. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes that told him she wasn't going to let this slide. Not for a second. Mark felt it too, the simmering anger. He was done being pushed around. "What are we going to do?" she asked quietly, almost as if reading his thoughts. Mark paused, his hand already on the phone. "I'm going to find out who's behind this," he said, his voice low but steady. "And when I do, they're going to regret ever messing with this family." And with that, the first move in what was going to become a dangerous game was set into motion. The HOA had made a critical mistake, but they had no idea just how much power they had stirred up in Mark Thompson. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Mark's mind was consumed by the HOA's shocking decree, and as the family waited for their appointment at the next HOA meeting, the frustration mounted. But beneath his surface calm, Mark was already at work, crafting a plan, one that would shake the HOA to its core. It wasn't long before Amanda noticed something strange. Mark, usually a man of few words, was becoming more focused, almost detached. He spent hours in his home office, making calls, poring over financial documents, and writing down lists he couldn't quite decipher. She didn't ask. She knew better than to pry when Mark's mind was set on something. But then, one evening, the tension finally broke. "Come into the office, Amanda," Mark said, his voice low, almost foreboding. There was an edge to his tone she had never heard before. Amanda stepped inside to find Mark at the desk, eyes gleaming with a dangerous focus. He looked up as she entered, his lips curling into a slow, confident smile that sent a chill down her spine. "I think it's time I told you something you didn't know about me." Amanda blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Mark leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him, exuding a calm that only intensified the unease growing inside her. "I didn't want to involve you in this," he said. "But now, well, you need to understand what's at stake." He paused, then dropped the bombshell. "I'm the vice president of a regional bank," he said, his words heavy with weight. "I have more power in this town than you realize. I've been involved with a number of projects tied to the HOA. Loans, investments, construction funding. My bank has had a hand in making this neighborhood what it is." Amanda's mouth went dry. She had always known her husband worked in banking, but she had never realized the extent of his influence. Mark wasn't just a banker. He was a key player in the financial engine that kept the neighborhood and the HOA running. Amanda's mind raced. "You've never mentioned any of this." Mark's eyes flickered with a hint of frustration, but he quickly masked it with his usual composure. "I didn't think I needed to. But now, it's different. The HOA doesn't know what they've just done." Amanda's pulse quickened as the pieces began to fall into place. "So you're going to use your connections?" she asked, almost breathless, "to make them reverse the decision?" Mark's gaze sharpened, and he nodded slowly. "I'm going to do more than that," he said quietly. "I'm going to make them regret ever trying to mess with my family. They're going to feel the full weight of what happens when you target the wrong person." Amanda stared at him, struck by the cold intensity in his eyes. She had always known Mark was capable of handling pressure, but this was something else entirely. His calm demeanor hid a man who was ruthless when it came to defending what was his. The stakes were no longer about a driveway. They were about something much bigger, something dangerous. "And what about me?" she asked, suddenly feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What if they retaliate? What if they—" "They won't," Mark interrupted, his voice unwavering. "Because I'm not going to leave them any room to move. I'm going to cripple their finances, their operations, everything. The HOA will be begging to let us park in our driveway." Amanda's heart skipped a beat as she realized the full extent of Mark's plan. This wasn't going to be a simple battle for a parking spot. Mark was preparing for a war, a financial war, and he was playing to win. As she watched him prepare for the next step in his quiet, calculated assault, a cold wave of both admiration and fear washed over her. The man sitting before her wasn't just her husband. He was a force of nature. And the HOA was about to feel the full brunt of it. The suspense in the room was suffocating. Mark's calm confidence was both reassuring and unsettling. What exactly was he planning to do next? The audience is left to wonder. How far will Mark take this? What's his next move? And will it destroy the HOA or him? The days that followed Mark's revelation were a blur of tense energy, and Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was in motion. Mark was no longer the man she knew, the quiet banker who came home after work, sitting by the fireplace with a cup of tea and a book. No, this was a man with a mission, a man whose calm demeanor masked a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The first sign that Mark wasn't just talking was when he made the call to his bank. The conversation, one that Amanda could only overhear from the hallway, was quiet but filled with a kind of authority she wasn't used to hearing from him. He spoke in terms of investments, collateral, and strategic leverage, his tone colder than she'd ever heard it. When the call ended, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "The first move has been made," he said simply, as though they were discussing grocery lists instead of something far more dangerous. Amanda could only nod, her curiosity now gnawing at her. "What did you do?" Mark didn't immediately answer. Instead, he moved to his desk and began scribbling notes on a pad of paper. It wasn't until he finished that he looked up at her, his eyes calculating, yet somehow distant. "I made sure the HOA's biggest financial backers get a little reminder of who's really in charge around here." Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. "You didn't." Mark smiled, a slow, almost predatory smile. "I did. We start with their development loans. They have a huge project coming up, a new luxury apartment complex they're hoping to build. Without the financing, they'll be stuck." Amanda swallowed hard. "But that's everything. The HOA can't operate without those funds." Mark's eyes darkened. Exactly. The audacity of his plan sent shivers through her. He wasn't just targeting the parking ban. He was planning to dismantle the entire foundation of the HOA's power structure. He was playing a game of financial chess, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. What if it backfired? What if the HOA came after him? Or worse, the entire family? But as days passed and the first wave of Mark's plan began to unfold, Amanda found herself increasingly swept up in the quiet chaos her husband had unleashed. The first signs of trouble for the HOA began to surface, not through public announcements or news reports, but through subtle, almost imperceptible changes. Contractors working on the HOA's new projects were pulling back. Architects and designers were reporting delays, citing financial difficulties that seemed to appear overnight. Amanda overheard conversations between neighbors at the grocery store, whispers that a major investor had suddenly pulled out of the HOA's development plans. No one seemed to know why, but the general consensus was that something was wrong. As for the HOA board, their mood at meetings seemed to grow more desperate with each passing day. But the true brilliance of Mark's strategy was how invisible it all seemed. The HOA couldn't trace the problems back to him. Not yet. They were left to flounder, blaming their own mismanagement, while the foundation of their power slowly crumbled beneath them. Still, there was an undercurrent of danger that Amanda couldn't shake. She'd seen how Mark handled pressure, but this was something entirely different. How long would the HOA sit idly by while their empire started to unravel? What would they do when they realized their financial lifeline had been severed, quietly and without warning? The first move was over, but Amanda felt like the real game was just beginning. One evening, as she sat beside Mark at the dinner table, she asked, almost without thinking, "What's next?" Mark didn't answer immediately, his fingers tapping against his glass. His eyes were distant, staring past her, as though calculating the next move in a game only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, yet there was an unmistakable edge to it. "We wait," he said, "for the cracks to show. And when they do, we strike again." Amanda stared at him, heart racing. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was war. The weeks that followed felt like a waiting game. Mark had pulled the strings, set the financial wheels in motion, and now all they could do was watch. The changes were subtle at first, whispers of delays, rumors of projects stalling, contractors canceling meetings. But as the days turned into weeks, the tension grew. It was only a matter of time before the HOA realized that they were under attack. And then it happened. It started with an unexpected letter, a formal warning from the HOA. The envelope was thick and official, The kind of correspondence that was never good news. Mark opened it in the kitchen, his brow furrowing as he read through the legal jargon. Amanda watched him carefully, knowing that whatever was inside, it would only make things more complicated. "Well," she asked, her voice low, "what does it say?" Mark's eyes narrowed as he scanned the letter. "They're escalating," he muttered. "They're accusing us of harassment. They claim we've been undermining the community's progress." Amanda's heart skipped a beat. Harassment? But we haven't done anything. "They're using the situation with the parking as a smokescreen," Mark replied, his voice calm but his jaw clenched. "They're trying to deflect attention from the real problem, their financial collapse." Amanda's pulse quickened. The HOA wasn't just sitting back and taking the hit. They were fighting back, using their power to turn the tables. Days later, at the local community center, Mark and Amanda found themselves face to face with the HOA board. The meeting room was packed with residents, murmurs filling the air as the board took their seats at the front. It was clear the tension was thick. Neighbors who had once been friendly waved them off coldly, their eyes filled with suspicion. Everyone had heard the rumors. Things were falling apart, and it wasn't just about a driveway anymore. "Mr. Thompson," the HOA president, Doug Patterson began, his voice tight with forced politeness, "we've received several complaints about your conduct. It seems your actions have been detrimental to the integrity of our community." Mark leaned forward, his gaze icy and calculating. "I've only acted in defense of my family's rights," he said, his voice smooth but laced with an unmistakable edge. "I'm here to discuss the ban on my driveway, which is both unreasonable and unfair." Doug's face tightened, and Amanda could feel the simmering animosity in the room. The rest of the board members, usually so composed, were now visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a full-blown confrontation. "Mr. Thompson," Doug continued, "we've also received reports of your interference with the HOA's financial operations, and we're not the only ones concerned. There's talk that your involvement with the bank has led to the withdrawal of crucial development funding." Mark didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands on the table and leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "If the funding was withdrawn, that's not my doing. I'm not the one who mismanaged your finances. I'm simply here to ensure that my family's rights are respected. If that causes you inconvenience, I'm sorry, but I'm not backing down." Doug's face reddened, and for a split second, Amanda saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. The HOA was in deeper trouble than anyone had realized. They had been blindsided by Mark's silent, strategic moves, and now they were scrambling for a way to cover their tracks. But as the meeting wore on, it became clear that the HOA wasn't going to give up easily. They may have been faltering financially, but their power within the community was still formidable. Doug's voice became more strident as he launched into a tirade about neighborhood unity, threatening to take legal action if Mark continued to interfere with their projects. Mark's response was calculated, almost chilling in its calmness. "Go ahead," he said, his voice steady but dripping with menace. "You're welcome to try. But know this, if you take this any further, it won't just be the driveway you'll lose. I'm prepared to go to war." The room fell silent. It was as though the air itself had thickened. Amanda could feel her breath catch in her throat. Mark's words hung in the space between them, a chilling promise that no one dared to challenge. After the meeting, the drive home was tense, the car filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Mark's grip on the wheel was tight. His jaw clenched as he stared ahead. Amanda, still trying to process what had just happened, couldn't shake the feeling that the war had only just begun. The HOA had struck back, but their reaction had only made Mark more determined. But what would happen next? Would the HOA escalate again? Or would Mark's financial warfare push them into a corner they couldn't escape? As the Thompson family pulled into their driveway, the tension seemed to intensify. Mark wasn't backing down, but neither was the HOA. The next move would be critical, and Amanda couldn't help but wonder how far this battle would go. The war between Mark Thompson and the HOA had escalated in ways neither side had anticipated. The battle over a simple parking space had transformed into a high-stakes financial showdown, with far-reaching consequences. As the days passed, the HOA's efforts to intimidate and discredit Mark only fueled his determination. But the pressure was mounting on both sides. No one knew who would crack first. Mark had been laying low for the past week, his eyes fixed on a new target. The HOA's real Achilles heel. He had been gathering intel, pulling strings behind the scenes. There was one thing the HOA couldn't afford to lose: control over their remaining development projects. If Mark could hit them where it hurt, in their most lucrative ventures, the HOA would be left with nothing. Amanda noticed the change in Mark. His usual calm, composed demeanor had taken on an almost predatory edge. He had been working late into the night, making phone calls, sending emails, and meeting with contacts that even Amanda hadn't known existed. She could see the glint of something darker in his eyes now. He wasn't just playing to win. He was playing to destroy. "What are you planning, Mark?" she asked one night, her voice a mix of curiosity and concern. They were sitting in the kitchen, the soft hum of the fridge the only sound breaking the silence. Mark's eyes flickered up from his phone, a cold smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I've made some adjustments," he said cryptically. "The HOA is going to feel the pressure soon enough, but it's not just about the money anymore. It's about power." Amanda's unease deepened. She had seen Mark stand firm, seen him take on challenges in the banking world, but this was something different. There was an intensity in his focus, a ruthless precision that sent chills down her spine. The following morning, Mark received the news he had been waiting for. A small, satisfied smile tugged at his lips as he read the email, his fingers tapping lightly on the table as he absorbed the details. "The banks have withdrawn their funding for the luxury apartments," he said quietly, almost to himself. Amanda froze. "What? That's it? They're out of the game?" Mark nodded slowly. "They've backed out. They're pulling the entire financing package." The email had come from a contact in the banking world, a quiet confirmation that one of the major investors behind the HOA's most important project had backed out of the deal. It was the moment Mark had been waiting for, the final domino to fall. As the news spread, the impact on the HOA was immediate. Workers on the site stopped showing up. Vendors pulled out of contracts. Construction permits were suddenly on hold. The once thriving project that had been at the center of the HOA's future was now stuck in limbo. By the time the HOA convened its emergency board meeting, the situation had become critical. Doug Patterson and the other board members were sweating, visibly shaken by the financial collapse that was unfolding in real time. They were scrambling to find a solution, but it was too late. The web Mark had carefully woven had trapped them. Doug's voice, usually authoritative, cracked under pressure as he addressed the room. "This is a disaster. We have to find a way to stop the bleeding. We can't afford to lose this project." But as the meeting wore on, the board members grew more and more desperate. The realization that the HOA's lifeblood, its financial security, was crumbling right before their eyes was sinking in. And all the while, Mark sat in his car outside the community center, watching it unfold with cold satisfaction. Amanda, sitting beside him, could feel the tension in the air. She could sense that Mark was on the brink of something even bigger. This wasn't just about making the HOA fold. It was about proving a point. Mark finally spoke, his voice steady but low. "This is just the beginning. They've made their move. Now it's time for the final strike." The finality of his words sent a shiver down Amanda's spine. What was Mark planning next? Mark's next move was already in the works, and it was clear now that the HOA's empire, built on power, money, and control, was crumbling. The question remained, would they bend, or would they fight back with everything they had? As the sun set on another day, Mark knew the clock was ticking. The final confrontation was approaching, and there was no turning back now. Who would come out victorious in this game of financial and personal stakes? The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the Thompson family's driveway. The once quiet suburban neighborhood had become the backdrop for a financial war, one that was now reaching its most dangerous stage. Mark sat at the kitchen table, the blueprints of the HOA's last remaining development projects spread out before him like a map of an empire in its final days. Amanda watched him with a growing sense of unease. She knew the plan had been building toward something big, but she hadn't realized how far Mark was willing to go, or how much he was willing to sacrifice. His hands, usually steady and calm, now trembled slightly as he adjusted the papers. The weight of what was coming pressed down on him, and Amanda could feel it. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice laced with concern, "are you sure about this?" Mark looked up at her, his gaze sharp but distant. "I've already come this far. There's no turning back." Amanda swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment they had all been waiting for was finally here, the final strike. The HOA's once powerful empire had already been brought to its knees by Mark's subtle financial war. Their luxury apartment project was in shambles. Contractors had pulled out. Permits were on hold. The HOA's board was reeling. But Mark wasn't done. "Do you think they'll give up?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark didn't answer immediately. His fingers traced the edges of the blueprints, as if weighing his next move. Then he said, "They don't have a choice. They're done." Amanda felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. She knew what Mark was capable of, but even she hadn't imagined how far he would go to win this battle. She watched as he stood up, his expression one of icy resolve. Later that day, Mark made his final phone call. The conversation was brief but loaded with power. He had made the last arrangements, his final move to cripple the HOA once and for all. Amanda couldn't hear the specifics of the conversation, but the way Mark's lips curled into a satisfied smile when he hung up left little to the imagination. That evening, the HOA held another emergency meeting, this time with a palpable sense of desperation in the air. Doug Patterson, the HOA president, looked as though he hadn't slept in days. The other board members were tense, their faces drawn with exhaustion and anxiety. The stakes had never been higher. Mark, as he always had, stayed in the background, watching from the shadows. He knew the next moments would be crucial. This was the last chance for the HOA to reverse their fate. But Mark's plan had already set the wheels in motion, and the HOA had unknowingly reached the point of no return. As Doug Patterson took his seat at the front of the room, his voice quivered with barely concealed panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a catastrophe," he said, his tone trembling. "The funding for our development projects is gone. We've lost our investors. The contractors are pulling out, and now we're facing the possibility of foreclosure on all of our properties." A murmur of disbelief ran through the room. The board members exchanged glances, panic rising in their eyes. "But why? What happened?" one of them asked. Doug's eyes were wide with realization. "We've been sabotaged. There's only one person who could have orchestrated this: Thompson." The room fell silent as the name hung in the air like a death sentence. They all knew what this meant. Mark had executed his final move. In the dim light of the conference room, Doug slammed his fist on the table. "This is war, then. We will not go down without a fight." Mark's lips curled into a knowing smile as he watched the chaos unfold. The HOA had tried to play their hand. Now, it was time to see if they could salvage what was left. But deep down, Mark knew the truth. Their empire was already falling apart. They had no one left to turn to. As Doug and the board members huddled together in an attempt to salvage what little was left, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his contact at the bank. "The final investment pullback has been confirmed. The HOA is officially bankrupt." A cold wave of satisfaction washed over him. The game was over. But the twist, what no one expected, was that Doug Patterson, desperate to keep his position, was about to do something reckless, something that would force Mark to take one final step. As Mark's phone buzzed again, his eyes darkened with realization. The HOA wasn't just going to surrender. The silence in the boardroom was thick, oppressive. Doug Patterson, once a confident, well-spoken president of the HOA, now looked like a man on the edge of a precipice. His hands gripped the table so tightly his knuckles were white, his eyes darting between his colleagues as panic rose in his chest. "We can't just let him win," Doug muttered under his breath, the weight of his own desperation suffocating him. "We can't let Thompson destroy everything we've built." The other board members shifted uneasily. They all knew what had happened. Mark Thompson, through his quiet, precise manipulations, had shattered the HOA's empire. Their projects were frozen. The bank had pulled out. Their finances were in ruins. But what Doug was suggesting now, it was something far riskier. One of the board members, a woman named Claire, spoke up hesitantly. "Doug, we've tried everything we could. Thompson's not just a banker. He's a shark in water. And we're the prey. If we keep pushing this, we might lose everything we've worked for." "No," Doug snapped, his eyes wild with a mixture of anger and fear. "We fight back. We go after him." The room fell silent. "What do you mean?" Another board member, Greg, asked cautiously, his voice laced with doubt. "We leak everything we know," Doug said, his voice suddenly cold. "We go public with the information. We expose him for what he really is. If he wants to play dirty, we'll show the whole neighborhood just how dirty he's been." Mark had underestimated just how far Doug was willing to go. Doug was a man whose ego was as fragile as his financial empire. He had lost his grip, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. Back at the Thompson house, Amanda was on edge. She hadn't seen Mark in hours. He'd been locked in his office, making calls, tying up loose ends. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a familiar name. It was Claire, one of the HOA board members who had always seemed uneasy with the way Doug ran things. Amanda picked up the phone, holding it to her ear. "Claire, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Listen to me carefully." Claire's voice came through, quick and urgent. "Doug's lost it. He's making a dangerous move. They're going to try to take Mark down. Publicly, ruthlessly. They've got dirt, real dirt, and they're going to expose him. You need to warn him." Amanda's heart skipped a beat. She could hear the fear in Claire's voice, and it sent a chill through her veins. What are they going to do? What kind of dirt? "I don't know the specifics, but Doug is pulling out all the stops. He's desperate. He'll do anything to win, even if it means dragging Mark through the mud. He thinks if he can destroy Mark's reputation, the HOA can claw its way back. I'm just telling you, be ready. I don't trust Doug, and I don't think this is going to end well." Before Amanda could respond, the line went dead. She stared at the phone, the weight of Claire's warning sinking in. Mark had won battles, but would he be able to weather this storm? Amanda felt a surge of panic. She rushed to the study, where Mark was still at his desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard. She told him everything Claire had said, and Mark's expression shifted from focused concentration to one of cold calculation. "We've known it would come to this," Mark said, his voice calm but with an edge of something darker. "The HOA won't go down without a fight, and Doug is too proud to admit defeat. But what he doesn't understand is that he's playing a losing hand." Mark leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he formulated his next move. "We need to control the narrative before they do. I'll go public before they get the chance. Let's give the neighborhood the truth before Doug can twist it into something else." Amanda's heart raced. The calmness in Mark's voice wasn't just strategic, it was chilling. They were about to step into a battlefield where the truth would become a weapon. Mark reached for his phone and began dialing numbers, his expression set in stone. "I'll leak everything they have," he muttered, almost to himself. "But I'll make sure the community knows the truth about the HOA's corruption before Doug can spin his lies." Amanda watched as Mark took the first step into a public confrontation that could either save them or destroy everything. She had seen her husband fight quietly, strategically, but now, for the first time, he was about to fight in the open, with everything on the line. Mark turned to Amanda with a sharp look in his eyes. "This is it, Amanda. The gloves come off now." The next few hours would change everything. The morning after Mark had made his decision to leak the HOA's corruption to the public, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. News outlets had picked up the story, and the entire neighborhood was buzzing with the scandal. The truth about the HOA's shady practices, its illegal maneuvers, backdoor deals, and the full extent of Doug Patterson's mismanagement was out in the open. But there was something more. Mark hadn't just fought back with facts. He'd anticipated every move Doug would make. The carefully crafted narrative he had prepared not only exposed the HOA's corrupt dealings, but also framed them in a way that made Doug appear desperate, reckless, and inept. The HOA's public image, already bruised from the failed developments and the financial collapse, was now in tatters. The news hit hard. The HOA, which had once controlled everything in the neighborhood, now faced an irreversible decline. People who had once feared the HOA's power were now rallying together. The neighborhood, fueled by outrage and disbelief, was beginning to demand changes. No one had ever imagined a community where the HOA was toppled by a single man. And yet, here they were, watching it unfold in real time. But the most dangerous part of Doug Patterson's plan was about to backfire. Mark had predicted this. When the truth was exposed, Doug would scramble to regain control. And in his panic, he would make one final, catastrophic mistake. It came just hours after the media storm began. Doug, in a last-ditch attempt to salvage his image, issued a statement, blaming Mark for everything. He claimed that Mark had orchestrated a smear campaign, fabricating evidence to bring down the HOA. But this time, Doug had overplayed his hand. Mark's legal team, having been on standby, had already anticipated such a move. They had prepared a counter-statement, backed by incontrovertible proof, evidence of the HOA's financial corruption, their illegal building permits, and most damning of all, the truth behind Doug's personal enrichment from the failed developments was now ready to be shown. And this time, Doug's own words would be used against him. Mark didn't need to say a word. The documents and video recordings were enough. The public outrage was swift and unrelenting. Doug's credibility evaporated in a matter of hours, leaving him no room to recover. The HOA board, once loyal to him, began distancing themselves, fearing the public backlash. Amanda watched all of this unfold in disbelief. For weeks, they had been at the mercy of the HOA's power. But now, Mark was turning the tide. His cold, calculated strategy had done what no one thought possible. He had dismantled the HOA's reign with precision, exposing them for the corrupt organization they were. But just as the final pieces were falling into place, a phone call interrupted Mark's moment of triumph. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and undeniably familiar. "It's over, Mark," said the voice, smooth as silk, but with a subtle threat lurking beneath. "You may have won this battle, but this isn't the end. I hope you're ready for what comes next." Mark's eyes narrowed. He recognized the voice immediately. It was from an old acquaintance in the banking world, someone he'd once trusted but had since distanced himself from, someone who had ties to Doug Patterson and the HOA's backers. "What do you want?" Mark asked, his tone cool but with an edge of suspicion. "I want you to understand something," the voice continued. "Doug's not the only one you've made enemies with. You've just taken down the last remaining power in this town, but you've left yourself exposed. You may have destroyed the HOA, but there are other forces at play here, bigger ones. You've won, but there will be consequences. Be ready." The line went dead. Mark stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. Amanda, standing just behind him, could sense the shift in his demeanor. He had just won the war, but the battle wasn't truly over. There was something darker lurking, something he hadn't accounted for. Mark turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "It's far from over, Amanda. This is just the beginning." As the neighborhood celebrated its newfound freedom, Mark's victory felt hollow. Doug Patterson was defeated. The HOA was finished. But in the world Mark navigated, one of high-stakes banking, ruthless enemies, and unseen alliances, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed.